So today I'm going to be replacing the alternator on this Jetta TDI 2011. The old alternator just backed up. I was still driving and the lights started flashing, everything shut down. I couldn't restart the vehicle. I had to tow it back home and got a reconditioned one. So that's the one I will be installing today, and I'll show you guys how I do that. The first thing to do when you want to replace your alternator is to place your vehicle in service position. I will put a link in the description below. The next thing now is to give ourselves room to actually get to the alternator, and I'm going to just remove the plastic cover. And the next thing what we'll do is we'll just remove this diesel filter and move it out the way. The diesel filter is held on by two bolts, one there that you remove, one there that you just have to loosen. It'll slip out, and then there's a nut right down there, and those are the three that you have to loosen up. So the first bolt up here is a 10. I will just take that off. And we want to be careful that it doesn't fall into the engine bay somewhere. Once you've done that, you can remove the nut on the other side. So you're going to need a longer extension to go down here to this nut. And I think it's just a good thing to have a magnet handy so that this nut don't fall out. There it is. So now what you've got to do is you take the filter and rotate it to the left. So it rotates out here on the left hand side where you've just loosened the bolt, and then on the right hand side where you've taken the nut off, you're going to have to lift it up to clear that thread of the bolt underneath. There we go. Now you just want to move these hoses out of the brackets that hold them in place. And then take a bungee cord and just attach it around So once you have your diesel filter tied up and out of the way, it's time now to take off the serpentine belt. Now to take off the serpentine belt, you have to release the tensioner, which is in the middle there. So make sure you know the orientation of the belt, how it runs through these different pulleys. Then you can put a 16mm socket on there, and as you pull towards the front of the car, it relaxes all the tension, and you can just slip your belt right off. There it is. Now the alternator has two bolts. They're 13mm. One is right down there at the bottom, and one is just inside there, just recessed in there. So I'll take those two out, and that will free up the alternator. It's broken loose. This one is also broken loose. Be careful, of course, you don't drop it as you take it out. It's a fairly long bolt. They both seem to be the same size. Now we can pull the alternator forward. The alternator seems to be stuck in here, and we're gonna have to persuade it with a pry bar to move forward. There we go. Now the next thing to do is to take off the support for the wiring right there, and that's an 8mm nut. So now we just clip off the harness over there, and then we're going to remove this cap, pry that off. Now we'll take off the cable here. That's a 14mm. So this is the moment we've been working towards, where we've got the alternator loose and we have space to take it out. And it comes right out, just like that. Okay, now it's time to compare the two alternators. This is the one coming out of the vehicle, the one that's defective, and that's the reconditioned one that's going to go in. And you can see it looks exactly the same from the side. Turn it around to the back, and once again you see them exactly the same. And so I think it's going to fit, and hopefully this is going to solve my problem. Now we have to do one more thing before we put in the new alternator. We need to check that this is working. This is a reconditioned one, and so you can use a multimeter, and you set this down there to measure your diodes, and you take your red lead and you put that on your case, and then you put the black lead on the positive power connection, and you see there's a reading of 560, and any reading between 500 and 800 is good. If you change the leads around, you'll see that there's just a 1. There's just no reading there. It's because the electricity only flows one way. Now, as we come to put the new alternator in, we start by putting on these connecting cables. And the first one is 8mm. And now we'll put on the 13mm nut that goes on with our positive. We snug that up nicely. Once we have that on, we'll put the plastic cap back on the top, just like that. This last connection I will leave until the end, and now it's just a matter of bolting our alternator back in. Once you feel it bite, don't over tighten. First to the bottom one. Till you've got them both seated, and then you can snug them up. So I don't have the torque specs for these, but they are mounting bolts, and you can snug them up quite nicely. On the other hand, I'm using a 3/8. I'm not going to go with a 1/2 inch on these, and I think this should be adequate if it's nice and snug. This is the moment where you realize that you should have plugged in the electrical connector earlier, because now it's going to be a tight fit to get that in there. Actually, it turns out not to be too bad, but you got to push until you hear the snap. So now you're going to put your serpentine belt back on, and what you want to make sure is that it's correctly seated around these pulleys. You loosen the tension. You release the tension there on the tensioner, and then make sure you've got your belt seated properly on all the pulleys. What you want to do is take a light and just go around to each of these and make sure it's properly seated. So now what we need to do is just put the diesel filter back in its place, and then close up the front, and we're done. Nice to see the new alternator in place. So if you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you around next time.